Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks Podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my special guest is Simon Lawton. Simon is the founder of Fluidride, a world-class mountain bike instructional school located in Seattle, Washington. He's helped riders all over the world in person and through his online videos. He's also a tireless mountain bike trail building advocate, and his nonprofit has helped disabled riders get back in the saddle. Thanks for joining us, Simon.
Nice to be here.
So you were a professional downhill mountain bike racer for 16 years and turned in many impressive finishes in that time. How did you personally become such a skilled rider?
I wouldn't say that I was that great of a downhiller, but regionally I was pretty good. I used to kind of like choke when I got to World Cups and things like that, just kind of like a bit of a mental block. But I have had some good results over the years, and I definitely had a lot of fun. The way in which I became such a skilled rider is really the same way in which I became a coach. It was just due to my own frustrations of my inability to ride like a pro. And kind of when things really switched from like Mammoth Mountain Kamikaze, like racing down fire roads, which I was quite good at right off the bat, when it switched to technical single track, that was really when I had to take a step back and just kind of say like, wow, this sport has really changed. And, is this something that I think I can do? And really what I did was I stood on the sideline and I watched riders and I saw what they were doing and I started to mimic those movements and then basically created a vocabulary to teach myself and kind of went from watching a few World Cups like that in person and then came back to the regional scene and just basically, was at the top of my game regionally for the first time in the pro class. And people just kind of said, how did you do that? What did you do? And I said, I just went and watched the world's best riders and figured out what they're doing. And then during practice, somebody said, hey, would you be willing to teach me, at the next race during practice? And I lived in my car. I had no money. And so I jokingly said, yeah, for $100. And he was like, yeah, sure. I said, okay. So that's kind of like how I've both kind of transform my own riding, but that's actually where my coaching comes from as well. I have no coaching certifications at all. I mean, there were no coaching certifications available when I started. And so this has just been really, it was a bit of a selfish effort to become the best rider I could possibly be. And then as I started to realize that in actually creating a base of techniques with my own terminology and being able to teach myself, I really started to realize like, wow, this is actually something that's transferable to others. And that's when I'm really excited about the prospect of teaching.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like you didn't have access to a coach or instructors when you were racing and sort of getting started. I mean, did that exist at that time? I mean, it seems like today it's pretty accessible, but
it's pretty accessible. I mean, we didn't even have proper video, so it wasn't even really possible to review your own riding.
Yeah.
The internet was still kind of a new thing in the 90s when I turned pro. I turned pro in 1996. And, even like the internet was pretty new. There were no mountain bike coaches. I mean, I could be completely off base here, but I think I was the first technical mountain bike coach that I know of. I mean, so I think when I started this in 96, I think, it's possible other people were going and I just didn't know about it. But so far as I knew at the time, I was the first one. And so it was an interesting process because people would say like, hey, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm a mountain bike coach. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, oh, I teach people to ride bikes. And they're like, oh, I know how to ride a bike.
Right.
No, there's actually, there's a lot to it. And it was kind of lost on people at first, even though within the racing world, there was interest to start. And that's really how it started, was from teaching racers. And then now there's such a strong recreational base that's completely transformed my company because I teach mostly recreational riders, quite a few racers, but mostly recreational riders.
Yeah. Well, how long did it take you to sort of develop that initial course or, instructional material back in the 90s?
That's a good question. I think really what I started to notice right away was just that there were certain key things that riders were doing. And it was interesting because I didn't have, like, in hindsight, it all seems so obvious. Like, oh yeah, like I created the system and I made this company and I got these trails open, and obviously those are great places to teach. But like at the time, I was just bumbling my way through. I had no idea what I was doing. So there was no sense of future with this. It was just kind of like, okay, how do I get faster? Okay, put pressure on the outside foot. Okay, that's a good start. And so my first coaching, I mean, really, I didn't have a system. And I still, like, it's interesting. Like, I mean, you can go on my website and you can read about what we teach during our coaching, when we're certifying coaches, what we teach them, that sort of thing. But it's not like there's a manual for it. It's not like I show up with notes when I teach. I'm really just showing up in the moment. And really most of it is about watching what people are not doing correctly and just getting proper movement going. So it's less about like a whole series of movements, even though I have put terms to movements. It's like I always tell my other coaches who work with me, I just like, we're more like filters. Like we're more like filtering out the stuff people shouldn't be doing. Because at the base of it, if you're able-bodied, then you can make these movements. And so it's not so much about covering up things that, like here's this whole new set of skills that you need to use. It's more about kind of removing physical and mental blocks that are causing to move incorrectly, or misperceptions of how one should move on a bike, causing people to move incorrectly. Because there's so much, both misperception maybe from things people are reading or hearing, but there's also this very strong human reaction to fear, which is basically the fight or flight mechanism, which blocks us from moving in the way we should. And really, when I talk about people who are naturally talented, people who have, who ride at the World Cup level, who have never had coaching, what they're able to do is to move in a way as, much of the time as though fight or flight does not exist. And that makes it just so much easier for them. I mean, you hear those people who are really good. They're like, I don't know, like just go faster.
Right.
But they don't really realize that they're doing something completely different than most riders, which is basically they're letting their energy into the hill. They're letting their energy into the mountain, and they're not guarded and fighting against it. And that's really what the most naturally talented riders are able to do. They actually move into the hill quite naturally. And that's just something that makes everything easy.
Huh. Well, yeah, I mean, it sounds like you are generally coaching people who have been mountain biking for a while and maybe they've picked up some bad habits along the way. But if you were coaching someone who is brand new to mountain biking, like they'd never done it before, what's sort of the first skill you'd have them learn?
So I actually did that last night. I had a group of riders, and one of them was somebody who had a lot of experience on the road and gravel, cyclocross, stuff like that. Never been on a mountain bike. It was his first day on his mountain bike, and it was pouring rain.
It's a good start.
It was. He did great. I mean, it was really exciting for him. I had a big group last night of riders who were kind of more on the endurance side of the cycling disciplines. And the first thing I teach people is a little bit surprising to a lot of people. It would really depend. Like if I had somebody who was brand new to cycling, obviously I teach them the control mechanisms. Here's how you brake.
Right.
The safety of it. But generally speaking, the first thing I teach people is how to corner, and that. Everything that I teach within the context of cornering kind of goes into everything else. I really talk about kind of laying a solid foundation. Like it was interesting. I had this group last night and they said, well, this private group had hired me. They said, well, we want to learn, X, Y, and Z. We want to learn how to go through technical routes. We want to do this. We want to do that. We don't have cornering on the list. And I just said, well, you guys are pinching the top tube with your knees. Your knees are locked out. Like you're not ready to go through routes. You have to actually lay a foundation first. And so that's a super important element. That's the most important element, is having a foundation. I kind of liken it to a house, basically. Like if you have a super solid foundation on a building, you can build a really tall building that will hold up in extreme conditions. But if you have like no foundation, you're not building something very strong. And so really my focus with my teaching is on building the most rock solid foundation I can. And that starts with cornering. And surprisingly enough, I don't start with body position. We do some basic drills that put people into position to where they feel it. And it's less about remember to stand like this. I mean, it's more basic than that. I really just teach what I call it throne position, but it's just a standing posture. It's really just a human standing posture where we stand with a very slight bend in the knees so that our knees are right over our toes. It's the same way humans walk. Like if you took a video of somebody walking up and down like gravel piles or hills or something, what you'd see is that the human's nose would be over their knees and their knees would be over their toes. It's really how a human balances. And so this is something that is at the root of our teaching. It's not that your nose is always over your knees on your bike, but there are certain things that you can see when fear comes in, or when somebody's new, is they tend to push their knees back, lock their knees, and get their knees back over the back of the bike. And that really keeps them from riding over the bottom bracket, which to me is the most kind of central and important part of the bicycle. Yeah. So I start cornering and get them understanding the role of the bottom bracket, the role of the pedal spindles, all the rotating portions of the bicycle, and get them starting to feel like this, like usually within 30 minutes, they're like, I've never ridden a bicycle like this. This is incredible.
Hmm.
And so that's the first thing I try to land is like, that's partly because it's a huge jump in their performance, and it's partly because then they really listen. They're like, oh my gosh, if this can happen in 30 minutes, what's going to happen in the next 2 hours?
Yeah, yeah, they can trust you. I mean, and it's interesting. It's interesting that you focus more sort of on letting people understand that feeling. I mean, it seems like a lot of instruction can kind of just get in your head where you're worried about what you're doing. Is my nose over my pedals, or where are my knees? But once you feel it, it sounds like that makes it just a lot easier, and it kind of clicks more intuitively.
Perfectly said. I mean, so what I talk about when I'm teaching, and this is something I bring up in most classes I'm teaching, is that, I mean, there are a lot of different, there are basically four main learning modalities, but however we learn, when you first start learning, you're kind of in your analytical mind. You're like, okay, like, what is this person saying to me?
Right.
How am I going to interpret this? And you're kind of overthinking, and that's just a part of the process of learning. And so what I encourage riders to do is each time they pass through, I'm always like saying, maybe drive the knee forward more or whatever. But when they come through and it looks right, I'm like, that looks great. And so I'm trying to like let them know that when I tell them it looks good, to feel what that feels like.
Yeah.
And then, so like say we're working on cornering and we're flowing down like a trail that has like 8 or 9 turns in it, and they're kind of repeating it. I encourage them. At the beginning, I just say you're going to be stuck in your mind, and you're going to be thinking you might push the wrong foot down. You might, everything might be backward because you're stuck in your analytical mind. I'm going to help coach you through those moments, make sure you're doing things correctly. And when you start to feel that flow, I want you to let go of your analytical thought and move into somatic absorption or response. So you're really just bringing this sensation into your body so that it becomes the response you're going to have when you're in a moment that's similar to the moment you're in when I'm teaching you. And then I encourage those riders to bounce in and out of the analytical and into the more the somatic response, the body response. More and more, like I encourage them to get more and more to the somatic end of things, and then to check in periodically with the analytical. What can tend to happen is riders, especially like more digital learners, they can get stuck in the analytical loop, and they don't really get into that. They don't really get the somatic response. So they're just trying to make a verbal checklist or a mental checklist when they're coming down the trail. And that's really not what we want. We really want to move into flow. And really what flow is the ability to do something so well that you no longer have conscious thought.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the
goal. We've all experienced that in one way or another in life, right? And it's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, for sure. So if cornering is sort of the base skill or the first skill people need to master, what's like a mountain bike skill that's really difficult for a lot of riders to master for whatever reason?
Oh, cornering.
It's also the hardest.
It's the hardest to do well, and there's so much confusion about how a bike should be turned. And I would say the hardest thing for most people to learn is what I call the front foot turn. So I would say most people really are, a high degree of riders are what I call back foot dominant. It doesn't really matter if you're front foot or back foot dominant, but it doesn't matter which foot you lead with. It's the foot you put pressure on. But most people will put their strong foot in the back, and they'll have a good back foot turn. So let's say I'm a left foot forward rider. My right foot's back, and it's my dominant foot. So they'll typically turn pretty well to the left because the right foot should turn us left. But then when they go into a right hand turn, they have a tendency to press that right foot by mistake instead of actually moving to the left foot, which is the front foot. It's a bit further forward. It's a little harder to access. And so I'd say even, particularly with very high level riders, like very, very high level riders, they're so surprised when I show them the weakness in their front foot turn. And for like new riders, they're like, oh my gosh, like I never even knew that leg existed, So this is really getting into being able to, like the whole idea with cornering, a big part of the introduction is the bicycle, the bottom bracket, the pedal spindles. But the other element of that is an introduction of the fact that just as we have handedness, like right-handed or left-handed or whatever, we have footedness. So we have this ability on one side that we maybe don't possess on the other side. And so like immediately, like right off the bat, in the first 10 minutes of class, we're working on becoming ambidextrous with our low body. And what I remind riders is that it's actually easier to do with our low body because at least in daily life, we walk around on both feet. We turn in both directions. We can choose to keep one of our hands in our pockets, but we can't choose, to not use both legs. And so even though one is going to be significantly more coordinated than the other, you can actually start picking up coordination of your second, what I call your second favorite side. You can start picking up coordination of your second favorite side much more quickly than you can with your low body than you can with your upper body.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think some of our listeners may be surprised to hear you say that. I mean, a lot of people, it seems, are, for them, the most difficult thing that they're trying to master or want to master is, like, say, a manual. I mean, it's something like that. Is that, one, is that even useful? And two, is that something that you would even bother teaching somebody?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly teach manuals. I mean, to go back to the footwork thing, there's a reason people struggle with manuals. Let's say I'm back foot dominant and I go to like shift my hips rearward to start to try to initiate a manual, and my back foot goes down and back and sinks all the way down to 6 o'clock. Well, I don't have any power in the fronts of my hands because I've actually lost that power, that ability to create pressure in the fronts of my hands from getting unwanted rotation at my foot base. So like that's a really common thing for me to see. I'll see people out in the park trying to practice their manuals, but their feet are spinning around every time they try to pull up, and so they don't have a foundation to move from. So that's one thing with manuals. The other thing I would say about manuals is that's a little bit tricky for teaching is, well, everybody wants to be able to do one, for one. And yes, they're extremely useful in terrain. They're extremely useful, but they're not that useful other than to look cool, like going through like the parking lot or down a street. And people have this tendency to think like, I need to be able to manual, like for a mile, which is fun and it's rad, but it doesn't really, like, you're not really doing that on the trail. And one thing that I think is so much easier about teaching manuals in a more of a trail setting is that if you think about what a manual, like how it's meant to work, anything you would want a manual for or over on the trail is going to pull you out of the manual.
Yeah.
So like anything you're going to like you come around a turn and there's like a branch down across the trail and you're like, ooh, I don't want to hit my front tire on that. So you manual into it, the back wheel hits it, it pulls you out. Or, oh, wow, there's a big puddle. I want to keep my kit clean.
Right.
So you manual through the puddle, and the back end of the puddle, that edge pulls you out of the manual. Or you come to like a little ditch and you manual through it, the back edge of the ditch pulls you out. Or you manual over a double, and that second bump on the double pulls you out of your manual. And so what tends to happen is people practice out in the open and they spook themselves because they flip over backward. So what I get people doing is I use what's called a bump board. It's the same thing we use for teaching featuring, which is hopping off natural terrain. We just have this board that doesn't move. That's maybe like a half round of log that's like 5 or 6 inches high. And we just set out cones before, and we have people start manualing like 5 feet before it, and then they can scoot back to the next cone and start manualing like 8 feet before it. And they're actually practicing using a target. So they manual toward this, what we call a bump board, and the back wheel hitting it pulls them out of the manual. And so now they're actually like, they can actually look down trail, focus on the object they want to manual for, and they can manual into it, which pulls them out of the manual. And that creates like a safety element that allows them to practice kind of freely and without that fear of flipping over backward, which is really like people start manualing like they might be learning pretty well, and then they land on their back, and then all of a sudden they start guarding, and their ability to manual is gone. So I think it's a really important trail skill, but it's a fairly advanced trail skill. I teach people to do what I call it passive pumping, which is just letting the bike find the ground. I teach people to use that a lot more than manuals. I mean, I use it like far more in my riding than I use an actual manual. But basically, when I'm going down trail, there are three key ways that I can deal with terrain. I can let my wheels stay on the ground, and within that there are two things I can do. I can either pump and press through, or I can just let the bike move around its own bottom bracket, which is what I call passive pumping. The second thing I could do is I could manual through something, which is quite advanced. The third thing I could do is compress into the front face of something and jump over something else down trail. So I could, turn a bump into a jump, or I could turn a rock or a root into a jump, which is what I call featuring. And so those are really the three ways I can deal with terrain. And I would say that like 90% of the time, my wheels are actually on the ground, like I'm either pumping or passive pumping. And then some of the time I'm jumping something, and some of the time I'm manualing through things. And people are very drawn to like the manual and to jumping over things. And that's awesome. I mean, it's super, super useful. I use all three of these things interchangeably. But the ability to like have a really strong position on the bicycle and understand how capable the bicycle is of going at incredible speeds through terrain is actually more important, like when I'm teaching, like that idea of passive pumping. I mean, the bicycle is the fastest human-powered vehicle in the world, which is pretty cool. But what a lot of people don't realize is it's the fastest vehicle down a trail. And that is for a very particular reason. It's because of the role that the rotating elements of the bicycle play. So like my bottom bracket, for instance, I can use that, and my pedal spindles. I can use the bottom bracket to create incredible cornering efficiency to really change the direction of my front side body by changing my foot height offset, the height of my feet in relation to one another. So it has this ability to corner like nothing else. I mean, you get down coming down a steep hill on like a dirt bike, and it's awful because you can't get your outside foot lower,
Right.
and you can't really take a foot off the motorcycle because you're going down a hill. And so like a bicycle is much faster for that reason going down like through corners, but it's also super, super fast through what I call undulating terrain. So like rocks, roots, just kind of uneven three-dimensional terrain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because my foot base can remain constant. So my feet, when my feet are level, my feet can remain level relative to one another and level to sea level. You know, so basically they can basically be my foot base. It's like I'm standing in the kitchen.
Right.
You know,
right.
bike can like do all kinds of crazy stuff underneath me. It can rotate around bottom bracket, and because I have pedal spindles underneath, you know, the bearings that are in my pedals that are under my feet, those two axles basically isolate the rider as well. So the bicycle can batter around way faster than I could ever think, push, pull, or rock, root, or whatever's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
I can just let it like batter through terrain. And so long as my position is really sound over the bottom bracket, the bicycle is going to be free to move underneath me. And then those pedal spindles, again, are allowing my feet to stay level relative to one another and level-ish relative to sea level, which is, when you think about it, it's really pretty astounding. I mean, you can go down a super steep, like quick roll down, and your foot base isn't really changing. You know, it's kind of like this escalator that comes down, you know, that comes down this incredibly steep, rough terrain, and the bicycle is able to find the ground underneath us and move around. And so it's really a unique system. And I think that that's probably, I would say that that's at the core of my teachings, is understanding the role that the bottom bracket plays and the role that the pedal spindles play. And most of the corrections we're making are based on control around those mechanisms. So that's primarily what we're working on. I mean, I have, you know, top riders from Whistler or whatever, they come down, you know, regularly, and they just want to have the most simple instruction. They want me to watch what they're doing at their foot pace, and they want me to make really small tweaks to that. And they always say that it just goes all the way through their riding, and that they're just, you know, like everything changes with their riding as soon as they make these really small changes at the foot base, because everything is built on that foundation.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, and for me, it brings all new meaning to the name of your company, Fluidride. I mean, imagining like a bubble level, you know, like it's always gonna point up no matter where you're pushing it around, and that's what water does, and that's what you do when you're on the bike. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
In all your years of training different riders all over the world, have you noticed any differences between riders of different ages? And I'm thinking particularly about middle-aged riders. Like, are they easier to instruct or more difficult because they've got maybe some bad habits built up?
You know, I think that's a really good question. I would say that the riders who are the most difficult to teach are the ones who show up and go like, I'm an expert. I've got 25 years experience. You're like, oh, okay, you got 25 years of bad habits, you know?
Right.
I would say that those are the hardest riders to teach. But once they buy off on the fact that, you know, like I've had people kind of show up saying like, yeah, I'm an expert rider. And then they'll tell me 2 hours later, wow, that's the first time I've ever actually ridden a bicycle. Like I thought I was riding my bicycle, but I've never ridden a bicycle until today.
Yeah.
And so those can be the toughest to teach. But everybody is super teachable. I mean, like I don't have trouble really teaching anybody. People have the ability to learn. You know, they don't, you know, kids learn the most quickly for sure. But then they might not be as interested in continuing to like keep working on fundamentals that are really, really important. And so I'd say that, you know, the base of my business is probably people like in their 40s, early 50s. It's probably the majority of the people I see. I don't know if that's not necessarily true. Maybe some of that has to do with my prices and things like that.
Right.
But I would say that those people are typically like the people in those ages they're really excited to learn. You know, they're really like, once they realize like, wow, like I thought I wasn't any good at this, and like I can be really, really good. And once that light bulb goes off where they're like, wow, and you know, and what I tell them is like, yeah, I mean, you're learning super well. You're mimicking what the best riders in the world are doing, and you're doing this within 30 minutes of starting. Like imagine what you can do if you just stick with this. And people are riding at levels like, I mean, yeah, I'm one of the fastest riders my age around, and people are, you know, are starting to approach my speed, having started riding bikes in their mid 40s, and they're starting to approach my speed within a few years, and I'm like, wow, this is incredible. I mean, they're actually like riding in Europe with me, and I stop and they're like 5 seconds behind me. I'm like, wow.
Yeah. Your secret's out.
The secret's out. Yeah. It's really cool to see people and they're just glowing, because they're just super psyched at how fast they're going and how effortless it is. And I think that's the big thing is like people come to class. I get this all the time. People ask me, like I had it last night even where somebody said like, look, like I believe in your teaching. It's great, but I don't want to go any faster. Can you help me? Can you still help me ride? And I was like, not really. No, because you're going to ride faster as a result of riding better, but you're not going to feel like you're taking nearly as many chances. And the bike's actually going to be smoother, and the force of the bicycle when you're in the correct position actually is going to reward you with a sensation of flow and of smoothness. And so I think there's this general idea where we equate speed with risk, and really what risk should be more associated with improper movement.
Yeah.
Really, as you go faster and faster, I mean, I always say this about the top pro riders, but the faster they go, up to a certain point where they break loose or whatever, up to a certain point, the faster they go, the more control they have. If we're in the right position, we're creating proper ground force. If you're out of position, the first thing that's out of position is going to make speed feel as though it's the danger. And it is the danger if you're out of position, because you're going to have more ground force on something that's not set up to handle that ground force. And that's going to be perceived as risk, as like, okay, I need to slow down. I'm taking too many chances. This is crazy. And as soon as you take that little glitch out of the rider's riding, I call it raising the speed ceiling. Suddenly they're like, the top blows off what they thought they could do before, because we're basically riding to our lowest common denominator. Like whatever the weakest part of your stance is, whatever your second favorite side is for cornering, whatever glitch or misgiving you have in your riding, you're riding down to that level. You don't have a choice. Like you might have a great left-hand turn and that's like sweet. And then you hit a right-hand turn, you're like, okay, slow. And then sweet, slow, And so when you get that to where it's like sweet, 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 like on both sides, you're like, oh my gosh, the trail just starts to like rapidly fly past you. And it's doing so with actually a sense of more confidence and control than you had when you were going actually much more slowly, but with a weakness in your riding.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it sounds like for middle-aged riders, openness is really the key to learning new skills, and they're able to pick up those skills just as quickly as anyone else. Do you have tips, though, for riders who are over 40 in terms of like fitness or injury prevention and recovery? Does that look a little bit different?
That's, I would say, I would say the main thing for riders in their 40s is education. Don't skimp on, if you find a good coach around your area, or if you come and do coaching with me or whoever you choose to do coaching with, if you find something that's really working for you, that's your best injury prevention. I have so many riders whose like wives or bosses or whatever are buying them classes with me because they're like, man, I just don't want you getting hurt anymore. And they think of me, a lot of people call me their security blanket, because they can come to me and they can try things they've never tried before. And because I'm there to actually change the foundational root of anything that's a weakness that could actually cause injury, I can change it like in the moment. Like I'm changing people's riding like so quickly, because if I see something that could cause injury, like in a jump class or something, like I'm going to immediately change that. Like I see them hit one jump and I'm like, all right, pull over to the side. Like we're going to change this right now. And then we just change it. And they're like, oh my gosh, I can jump. So I would say that's the most important thing for injury prevention, is an understanding of what you're doing well on the bike and what you're doing, what you could improve on the bike, is being able to elevate your riding. Now that also goes down the line of, I would say, less than like the ability to recover from injury as you get older, is more about the ability to recover from fear of a past experience is even more important. And this is where education is so important. So basically, if I fall or if I have a close call or whatever, and I understand exactly what I did wrong because I've been to a coach and I know like, okay, Simon told me, sometimes when I do this, I'll push my inside foot by mistake, and that's what happened. And I went down hard, but I know exactly what I did wrong.
Right.
And that rider's not going to have the kind of fear, even if they were injured, they're not going to have the kind of fear that a rider who says, I went out and rode my bike and I hit the ground hard and I have no idea what happened.
Right.
We'd kind of be idiots if we just kept going out and throwing ourselves down a hill at that age. And like, well, that didn't work. Let me just try it again. Well, that didn't work. Let me just try it again. Like, we don't want to be doing that in our 40s, So like that idea of being able to do something and being able to understand either why you had success or what like misgiving in your riding caused like an issue, that's going to take away that mental fear, and that's going to really be the thing that's going to keep you enthusiastic about grabbing your bike again after you do fall down. Like, okay, like I fell, but I know what I did. Now, I can't wait to get my cast off so I can go and do this properly. Right? Whereas if you didn't know what you did, you'd be like, yeah, I'm going to get my cast off, but I don't really know if I'm going to go back out and try that again.
Yeah.
So for me, that's the most empowering. I would say one of the most empowering parts of teaching is seeing people light up and understand this thing, but also having them have kind of an academic sense of how the bicycle should be ridden, so that they're able to critique themselves as they continue to develop as riders, and so that they're able to, at a reasonable level, at least keep fear at bay. Of course, fear is there for a reason. It's there to also to help keep us safe, and so it's a little bit of a fine line dance around that. But I would say that that's the thing that causes most people to fall. Most falls are actually caused by fear, whether it's conscious or subconscious, even at the highest level. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. But yeah, I'd say that that's the main thing. So I don't focus too much. I mean, like I do a lot of yoga, and I always encourage people to practice yoga because it's the best thing for injury prevention in terms of like the physicality of your body. It's the best thing for creating the equality between both sides of the body that I've experienced, because you're doing poses with your left side and your right side equally. It's, so you've got strength, flexibility, coordination, all these things. And then the ability to recover from injuries, I think, is greatly enhanced with yoga. But I would say that's probably my go-to, like a good diet. I eat super well. I practice yoga. Those are all good things. And a little bit more on the woo-woo side of things. I practice a lot of pranayama as well. So I do a lot of breath work. And I really find that can be a super grounding thing for people, because one of the things that happens when we have a lot of fear is we have chemical changes in our body, things that happen that we don't perceive ourselves as being able to control, and when in fact we actually can control them through breath, which is something that's been like kind of a passion of mine now for 10 or 15 years, and something that was really like I always believed in it, and I practiced it, and I started free diving about 5 or 6 years ago, and that was really when I was like, wow, breath is super, super incredible. It's really like the foundation of our ability to calm our parasympathetic nervous system, which is kind of like what creates that sense of anxiety and the fight or flight mechanism and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, your work with Fluidride has taken you all over the world, and your company, I believe, even offers mountain bike tours in various places around the globe. So what's your personal favorite place to ride?
Oh, I love the French Alps. I love riding in Chamonix. It's so good. It's so cool because it's really varied. I've got the guys who guide for me over there have become really close friends of mine. And they've just shown me a kind of like a whole nother world of just kind of natural riding, which I really, really love. The mountains are pretty raw over there. So the riding in the valley is quite steep, but it's varied. You can go down out of the base of the valley and find less steep stuff. And maybe if it's Mont Blanc's right there, there's a lot of weather that's caused by the size of the mountains there. If we're having like really inclement weather in the valley, we can pop through the tunnel into Aosta Valley in Italy. So you just go under Mont Blanc and like 10 miles later, you're like, boom. Oh, it's like you're in not a desert, but you're like in an arid environment. It's sunny and it's warm. And, so it's really like topographically, it's very varied in that area within a 1 hour drive. And so I absolutely love riding there because I feel like if I go there for a week, that I just experience diversity, like riding in the valley and then riding in Italy. And then maybe if it's really hot and dry, we go and ride some nice steep slopes over in Switzerland, which is the dirt in those areas is very different than the dirt in the valley. So I feel like that, like all that variety and just the views and just the splendor of the Alps, like that's definitely one of my favorite places to ride. Cool. Then, we also have tours in Finale Ligure, and I've only been there now. This is my second time there. We just came back about a month ago from Finale, and it's incredible there. They have the EWS races there. Mm-hmm. A lot of people perceive it as being super rocky. All the famous pictures are right by the ocean where it's really rocky. But if you get up high in the mountains there, we have an amazing guide. Louise Paulin is our guide there, and she has access to 4-wheel drives and takes you like to where the trails are not beaten up. So we have like a 9-passenger Range Rover, and we go up there and get up to where the trails are super loamy and it's just incredible. So it's more kind of reminds me a little bit of the Pacific Northwest. And then, of course, the riding here in Seattle is amazing now. So
yeah,
we're pretty spoiled for sure. Yeah, it's totally world class here. So
for sure.
Great trails everywhere. And I love riding in South America. I spent a lot of time riding in the Andes as well. We've not put on a tour there yet, but I think I've been there 6 or 7 times. And that's a totally different experience as well. They call it, like in the area we ride a lot, they call it the anti-grip. It's not very grippy like the Northwest. So it's a bit of a wake up call, but it's stunning and just completely different to be in those huge mountains.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned Seattle, and you played a big role in establishing the I-5 Colonnade Mountain Bike Park, which is a really unique riding spot located underneath a highway overpass. So how did that project come together, and what were some of the challenges that you guys faced?
Yeah, so it's interesting, again, in retrospect, to look back at it, because there was no foresight. Like, I had no idea what I was doing, but I used to, basically, there's like 10 lanes of traffic right by downtown Seattle. There's like 10 lanes of highway, including the on-ramps and off-ramps and everything. And there's this big open dirt space where it was kind of gross. Like, a lot of, people camped and lived down there. It was dirt was kind of yucky, but there was no place to ride. There was like literally no place to ride in the Seattle area. There was like one trail. This is in the 90s. And so I used to go, I lived nearby that freeway. And so I used to ride over there, and I'd like make some berms in this gross dirt and like try to like do a little bit of practice. And one day I was coming out of my house, and this neighbor guy, he said, "Hey, have you ever seen that space that's underneath I-5?" And I said, "Yeah," because he saw me going out with my bike. And I said, "I'm actually heading to ride over there now." And he said, "Have you ever thought about making that into a mountain bike park?" And I'm like, "Yeah, every day, but how would you do that?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, I'm actually I'm the East Lake, which is like kind of the little area I lived in." He said, "I'm the East Lake like council chair or something." I don't know. He was politically involved, and he said, "I can help you make that happen if you want to." And I was kind of like, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." So basically, his name is Chris Lehman, and he pushed me in the right direction for my first meeting, and that just went on for years. He just kept saying like, "Okay, now go to this meeting, now go to that meeting," and he just like, I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
I had zero idea like of what would actually come. And then the Pro Parks levy came up, where Seattle voters, I don't even know what year that was. I'm going to say, like, I could be totally wrong here, like 2004 or something like that. Seattle voters basically approved this big parks levy, which put a bunch of money aside to create parks, but it also put money aside for displaced people, for the homeless people. They were going to built a lot more shower spaces and things like that, because people would be displaced as the parks were built. And so I was able to somehow, in some bumbling way, secure $1.88 million from the city of Seattle. And like, it seemed kind of surreal. I'm like, is this really real? Like, I don't really know what to do with this. And like, it seemed like it was going to happen. And so I walked into an Evergreen meeting, which Evergreen is our nonprofit in the area. And they were just an amazing crew of people. It was, back then it was called the Backcountry Bicycle Trails Club. And so I went into a meeting, and I said, like, "Hey, I think I've got this thing approved for this park. I don't really know what it is, but I think it's like it's almost $2 million. Do you guys want $2 million to build a park?" And at the time, I think their operating budget was $35,000. Their even like the head of the board was unpaid. There were no paid spots there. And the executive director at the time was John Kennedy. He's somebody I've gone on to have quite a long relationship with. And so they said, "Yeah, of course we want to do that." And so they took that over, and just using volunteer labor, they started to put it together. And with that money, they took their lead trail builder, Mike Westra, who's still he's still in charge of, he doesn't actually shovel dirt anymore, but he's in charge of all the builders now. They actually gave him a paid position, and I think they started paying the executive director a little bit. And that was kind of the beginning of Evergreen really becoming what it is today, which is this highly powered, highly funded force. I mean, they are such incredible workers. I was on the board of directors for like three or 4 years, and I stepped down like due to gross incompetence, because I was like, what even people are talking about? They're so like savvy when it comes to politics and grants, and it's just a whole other world from the world that I live in, and they're really amazing to watch them navigate. So that's kind of how Colonnade came to be, was just through this stumbling process of not having a place to ride. And people said, I don't think that's going to last very long, because it's underneath I-5. And I said, this isn't about this park. This is about gaining traction with the community and having the community see that when we ask for volunteers, that like hundreds of people come out, which is what happened. And that's really what was the springboard for Duthie Hill Park, which I played a part in as well. And with that, I still kind of I was kind of in disbelief that they'd let us build this park under I-5. I still had no idea that we could have actual legitimate trails in the out in the wild, like on DNR land and stuff like that. That didn't even cross my mind. Like that was like pie in the sky. That's never going to happen,
Right, right. Nobody needs the land under the highway, but
exactly.
It's a different story when you're talking about a park.
Yeah, so I was bugging the powers that be at King County, which is the big county that Seattle's a part of. I was bugging the powers that be to try to let us take a small piece of each of the existing parks in downtown Seattle and make like a pump track here and a single track there and a dirt jump here, so you could ride around the city of Seattle and you could hit all these mountain bike spots, because it never occurred to me to actually have real mountain biking. And after bugging the guy from King County for years, one day he called me up and he said, "Hey, I think I've got something for you." And he said, "Meet me out in Issaquah." And I'm like, "Okay." So met him out there. We walked up through all these brambles into this beautiful green space with big trees and everything. And he's like, kind of more or less said, "Will you leave me alone if I give you this land?" I said, "Yeah, for a while, probably." So that was something that was immediately handed over to Evergreen. Like I didn't even finish the process there. I think Evergreen, really took the reins on that and finished that out. And I think that was a very similar amount of money that they were able to get there. I don't really know the details of it. But I remember when he showed me around, I thought, well, it's kind of flat. I came from a downhill background. It's only like 130 feet of vertical at Duke. And what Evergreen has done with it defies gravity.
Yeah.
I mean,
cool.
It is. It's amazing. Like you can flow down these trails and the pedal up is like 1 minute and 2 minutes, back to the top. And you're like, wow, this is like as much descending as it is climbing. It's super well designed, super well built. I call it like the lab for teaching. It's probably the best place that I've ever taught mountain bikers, just in terms of the diversity and how close everything is. It's definitely, if you haven't hit it yet, you should definitely put it on your hit list. It's pretty cool. It is what it is. It's just a skills park. It's 125 acres, but it's basically at mile point 17 on I-90, and then mile point 25 is Tiger Mountain, mile point 27 is Raging River. It just goes on and on. Up the pass, we have all these exits up the pass that are just amazing. So the I-90 corridor has really become a world-class riding destination.
Yeah, very cool. So I was also interested to learn that you worked for years helping develop an artificial knee that allows above the knee leg amputees to pedal a bike. So how'd you get involved in that project?
Yeah, that was a big project. So I was a Red Bull, they called me like a local legends athlete. So I was a Red Bull branded athlete for a while, and Red Bull rang me up one day and they just said like, "Hey, we got this guy. We'd love you to have you work with him. He's a above the knee amputee, but he's an amazing mountain biker." And so his name is Brian Bartlett. And so he came out to take a class, and I was like, first thing I was like, "All right, stand up and come through this skill drill." And he's like, "Well, I can't stand up." And he had some sort of a riding leg that he was kind of starting to create. And I said, "Well, what do you mean you can't stand up? Even like on a prosthetic leg, you can't stand up and balance with your level feet?" And he said, "Nobody can stand and sprint who's missing their knee. There's no such thing." And being super naive at the time, I actually owned bike shops back then. I said, "Well, let's go to the bike shop and let's rifle through the parts bin. There's got to be some parts we can use to get you standing." And it's like, okay, kind of a long shot, right? Since I'm not a mechanic.
Yeah.
And so we were kind of looking at MRP rollers, and he had this idea already for this tendon system. And we kind of cobbled together some things that kind of started to work. He couldn't he could kind of stand up, but he couldn't really it wasn't quite right yet. And so I just kind of was thinking about okay, I've got all these students I've got all these connections. Like who would have a connection to somebody, to some engineers or, who would be interested in helping remobilize people. And I realized that one of the guys I was working with was high up at Weyerhaeuser, so timber, lumber industry. And I thought, well, they must have some injuries, lose some limbs, with that. And so I called him up, and Steve was super nice and got me set up with a meeting at Weyerhaeuser. And basically Weyerhaeuser offered to give me basically like a team of, it was 8 or 10 people, mostly engineers. Wow. for a year. And I would go in with video of Brian riding, and then I would show a video of somebody, with I don't want to say able-bodied, but with 2 normal legs working. Yeah. And I would show the difference and what we were struggling with, and they basically helped us hone in on the details. Brian already had a lot of ideas that ended up being a big part of the final design. But some of the things that were surprising, like we wanted suspension in the leg, so we put a shock in the back of the knee, but that ended up being to return the leg. So the big problem was like, you know, you could pedal, but then like you couldn't get your leg back underneath you. And so the shock ended up being to help the rider pedal. And it was pretty cool. Like we put this leg together. I think I didn't keep any part of the business element of it. So it's called the Bartlett tendon. It's named after Brian Bartlett, the guy I met. I'm pretty sure he's still selling the leg. I want to say that they're less than $4,000, which for a prosthetic is incredible.
Yeah. Seems reasonable.
Yeah, and it comes in this really trick like aluminum case last I saw, and it was pretty cool. Like we did some, like we showed up on the East Coast and brought a leg for somebody there, and he was missing pretty high up, you know, almost up to his hip. He was missing. He didn't have much to attach it to, but we attached it to him, and I was riding with Lars Sternberg, who's a super fast downhiller guy. He works with transition, and he was on my team at the time, and we got this guy's leg put on him, and we took the ski lift up, and I mean, Lars and I were like hanging on for dear life to keep up with this guy. We're like, oh my God, this guy is pinning, you know, it was insane. I mean, he was jumping everything, and he was like standing and sprinting, and we were like, wow. And so we were able to go and give those legs to a few people, and to watch them just get on the bike, stand up and pedal away. And like they never stood and sprinted, you know, since they'd lost their leg.
Yeah.
And to watch them be able to like stand up and deal with bumps, obviously, you know, you don't want to be sitting on the saddle on a technical downhill. So really like a magical thing. And at the time, my partner at the time, she helped set up a nonprofit that we ran. It was called Athletic Prosthetics. So we were able to do all of this underneath, you know, that umbrella of athletic prosthetics. And so once we got the project really kind of like dialed in, I just said, hey, Brian, this is yours. And that's kind of something that I've done with other elements, like with the Northwest Cup. That was originally the Fluidride Cup, and once that took off, I was like, hey guys, you know, you guys can run this race series, and can't have the name, but you can keep it. And so that's kind of a big part of that's kind of become a theme in what I do, kind of like with the development of lands and things like that, helping people get it to a certain level where the thing can run on its own, and being like, okay, now it's your baby, go ahead and take it.
Yeah.
You
know? Very cool. So your latest project, Snap MTB, involves a new mountain bike skills online learning environment. So a lot of universities now are offering online classes for academic subjects, but how does this look different for mountain bike instruction?
So, I mean, for me, it's a deep dive into my own teaching, which is super, super cool. And funnily enough, it's really an opportunity to have like really my first TV. I've never had I don't watch TV. Now I have a 75-inch TV monitor or 75-inch monitor on the wall, which is a touchscreen. So I actually got the idea from a student. He came and took a class about 4 or 5 years ago. And I'd kind of been thinking loosely about some kind of online platform, but I didn't really have like a way to kind of like conceptualize exactly how it might look. And this guy came and took a class, and he at the end of the class, he contacted me. He said, I can't remember what his PhDs are in, but he had a couple of PhDs in instruction. And he just said, you know, man, like your teaching is really solid and it's really good. And like, I really was super impressed by the way you taught. But he said, the thing I really learned the most from was when you showed the reviews of what people were doing right and wrong using slow motion video. Like, because I often will use like an iPad or like I have a large cell phone, and I shoot a lot of slow motion video while I'm teaching and show the little things that are causing issues with riders. It's also a tool for coaches who are new to coaching to slow down what's happening so they can see it more clearly. And he just said, you know, like if you had a way of like doing like John Madden style recaps of riders, it would be insane, man. I could learn so much, you know? And so he was like really personally interested in having me set that up. And as technology has improved, and as I've kind of got a little more bandwidth with my business, I have a little bit of help now with people who are actually a lot more technically savvy than I am. I just decided to go for it. And I was like, you know, this is a great opportunity. I'm going to just get the 75-inch monitor. I'm going to stand up there. I made a studio in my house. So it's basically,
cool.
I'm being filmed kind of like somebody like a John Madden style thing, you know, like football recap, like highlights. And to start, I'm showing a lot of my own riding. I'm showing some students have given me rights to video, but we're working to get rights to, you know, like a lot of mainstream video as well. And that's all going super, super well. And so basically to start, we're hoping to launch in the next like six to 8 weeks. We'll see how that goes, but we've made rapid progress. I think we've got like, I don't know, like 30 or 40 videos done already. And the videos are like anywhere between 5 minutes and 20 minutes long. And so I can take a very short video clip and I can talk for as long as I want about it, because
Yeah.
I'm not constricted by the normal bandwidth of like, okay, people are only interested for 2 minutes on YouTube. This is going to be for people who want to take the deep dive and they really want to learn the topic.
Right.
So what we're doing to start is we're just basically taking all of our classes that we teach online, like every class. If you go to my website, you see the different classes, Trail Essentials, Advanced Cornering, all the air classes, and we're breaking down the movements that we teach and the terminologies that we use in those classes, and we're doing that on a big screen. And there will be a number of modalities that the end user, like if you're on your phone, you could just click screen only, and it's just a recording of the screen. So you can hear me talking, but you're not going to see me standing there. That way, the screen's actually to see what's going on, and I'm drawing on the screen and talking. Or if maybe you're on your computer or watching on your TV at home, you can actually see me standing in front of the screen teaching. And we used it. We went down and trained 37 instructors for Ninja mountain bike schools recently down in Chiloquin, Oregon. And we decided to show them an hour's worth of snap videos in the morning. And I'd never actually seen any of the videos yet. I'd just been making them.
Yeah.
So this is just a couple weeks ago. And so Brandon Cicino, who's my tech guy and kind of like responsible for a lot of the awesome things that are happening with Fluidride, he got it all set up. And we showed these videos to this room full of instructors, and they were definitely into it. They were definitely entranced. And so we'd do like a 10-minute video and like 10 minutes of Q&A. And I think it was actually one of the strongest teaching moments of the teacher training we did with them, was just that first kind of 90 minutes of just watching things, breaking it down, having questions asked, and just being able to go back to the video and just show exactly what I meant and exactly what I was talking about. I think it really landed well with people. And so I'm excited to bring this to the broader public, where it's something we should be able to translate into multiple languages and to be able to reach a lot of people with our instruction for the first time. So we're really excited. It's going to be kind of like a Netflix type thing, kind of similarly priced, probably in the $15 to $20 range per month. And then you'll have unlimited access to all of our instruction. We're also putting our 3 feature-length movies, which have been out for quite a while now. We're putting those on the site, so that'll be a part of it as well.
Oh, cool.
One of the things that's new with Fluidride is, while we have the luxury of being able just to stay in Seattle and people come to us, like I kind of got into this habit of being home, and it's been really, really nice. But I really feel like people have been so good about coming to visit us that we're going to come and visit them. So
cool.
We're actually doing like a U.S. tour that we're just in the process of setting up. Just today, I've got a new employee starting. He's Dan Bassett, who was the former director of education at Evergreen. I kind of pinched him away from Evergreen because
cool.
He's awesome. And he's going to help me basically starting today. We're going to be setting up our 2020 tour, where we're going to be, in different locations, from everything potentially from, Southern California to Texas to Florida to Georgia to around. I mean, we're not going to do this as our nonstop go-to, at least not right now, but we are going to try to like make a pretty comprehensive U.S. tour for next year, where we visit at least one outside location per month throughout the year, so that we're not just always here in Seattle.
Yeah, awesome. That seems like a really great opportunity for people to experience the Fluidride training system sort of in person. And it sounds like that's a big part of it. I mean, you need to be able to feel this stuff and not just see it and understand it. You gotta actually experience it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the best way. I mean, a lot of people will ask me questions. I just say, well, hey, just grab your bike. Once you feel it, like you're like, oh, okay, I get this. Yeah, this is like a total transformation of the way I'm moving over the bicycle and the way I'm thinking about moving over the bicycle. And one of the things we're thinking of as well, because of the reception we got with the Ninja mountain bike training, was we started thinking like, well, what about like going and actually just doing some live instruction with a screen, like when it's not like kind of like the Stoke before the season starts in certain places. So we've thought about even doing like some sort of a tour where it's kind of like a meet and greet. Maybe we have instruction on cornering and jumping, but it's all done using a big screen, talking. We've got an audience in front of us, and then, we can have Q&A afterward. And, really for me, I would say the biggest gift of this whole instructional thing has been the building of community. And I say this at the end of every class. I just say, like, look around where you live. Look around like how you can come to this park here and you see all these people we've really built, just by sheer dumb luck, we've really just built this community that's just amazing in the Northwest. And so I really am eager to get out and to share that that sense of community stoke with other people. And like, that's really what Snap is about to me, is like, it's shot in my living room. So I'm like inviting people into my home,
Yeah.
so I'm inviting the whole worldwide mountain bike community into my home to come and learn with me. And I really feel like, it's kind of a strange thing to say, but I really feel like the mountain bike community of the world is my extended family, so
Yeah.
because it's provided my livelihood. The people are really interested in what I'm doing. A lot of riders are really interested in what I'm doing, and they're really generous with their time with me. And so it's something that I'm just endlessly thankful for. My inability to be qualified to do anything else in life has kept me bumbling long enough to stumble on what I've created somehow. And so it's really been a magical time in my life.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. This has been really helpful for me and I'm sure for our listeners as well.
You're very welcome. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, you can find out more about Fluidride at fluidride.com. And also, if you're enjoying the Single Tracks podcast, we'd love to have you rate us in iTunes. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week. Peace.